I knew from super early age, probably 10 years old, I was going in the military. I applied to Navy ROTC, which is how you become a Marine officer unless you go to the academy, Naval Academy. And I applied to West Point. I was looking at Cornell, Vanderbilt, and West Point. And I tell this buddy's dad, what I'm looking at. And he said to me, man, let me tell you, if you go to West Point and then go get a Harvard MBA, you will be set for life. So I went to West Point, and I just figured I'd be an Army Ranger just like my uncle. I had been wrong, because if there was anybody that should be a Marine officer coming out of West Point, it should have been me. We're a Gold Star family. There's no reason whatsoever that I shouldn't be a Marine officer. So as I kind of got mad at the academy, I decided, well, I'm going to make the academy suit me. I started an underground fraternity. We used Delta Sigma because Delta Sigma stood for the dark side. At the academy, when you get in trouble, you get demerits. If you get enough demerits, you have to walk what they call penalty tours, which means you put your full dress uniform on, get your rifle, you go to one of the quads, and you have to march back and forth for an hour at a time. We'd go off base when you're not supposed to. We'd drink on base when you're not supposed to. And obviously we would get caught. And so things started happening. I was invited to a conduct review board where if that goes poorly, they can kick you out. I ended up getting called before the honor court at West Point. That's a big deal. I think it's a big deal anywhere, but it's a really big deal at West Point. Superintendent of the academy was a 3-star general who told me that as a result of the honor board that I was going to be kicked out of the academy. So the military has known about veteran suicides and service member suicides for a long time. I know we talk about it a lot today. They've known about it for a long time, and it's a problem. They do what they can. And at West Point, nobody could be in a single room by themselves. And because of that, I was laying in bed, and right out of the closet that was in that room came a dark, shadowy figure. And he was scary. You can't speak. You want to scream, but you can't. So it was pretty freaky. And this thing reached out his hand to me and said, "Join me." I never had the opportunity to develop an understanding of spiritual warfare or what a real personal relationship with Jesus Christ meant. So when this thing comes out of the closet at me, I didn't know what to do. I would tell you, I wish I could tell you that was like a benchmark moment in my life, that I stepped off in a different direction or a different path. That wouldn't be true. We sued the federal government, and in the course of suing the federal government, it came out that there were 2 active duty Army officers who had colluded amongst themselves to get me thrown out because they didn't think I should be an Army officer. The path I had designed for myself was interrupted for certain at that point. This other girl was hanging out with her boyfriend. I went up to Heather's room and we did a pizza and Pictionary party. So I asked her if when I got back to college, if I could ask her out on a date. She said yes. I went to OCS and did that, came back to campus and called her up, and she went out on a date with me. And we had a great time. And then we didn't have a great time. I forgot to tell her we weren't dating anymore. And she ran into me at a club with somebody else. I'm looking through my mail. One of them happened to be a letter from Heather. That letter was letting me know that I was a dad. She elected to give Josh up for adoption. Almost immediately thereafter, regretted the decision. Heather started to really ask me, what is it that you believe about fill in the blank? Or why do you believe that? What do you believe about that? And I couldn't answer her questions. Had I been successful in pressing the contractors to get us back in that house, I wouldn't be sitting in front of you today. So early childhood. I don't think I've ever started that far back. I was born in Manhattan, actually. So my dad was in the Marine Corps. And when he left active duty, he went to work for a bank in New York. My dad was from Arkansas. And when he left active duty, he went to work for a bank in New York. And he met my mom when he was on active duty in Virginia. Cool story. They met actually at a young adults group at the United Methodist Church of Williamsburg, Virginia. My grandfather, who had served in World War II in Korea, my mom's dad, retired to Williamsburg. And so when my mom got out of college, she went back home for a little while, and that's where my mom and dad met. He went up to New York. They ended up getting married, and she moved up there, and we lived in New York, and I was born in Manhattan. We lived in Brooklyn Heights. Lived there a very little while, and then moved actually to New Jersey. And I went to kindergarten through like 5th grade, I think, in New Jersey. And then we moved to Connecticut. And I tell people I grew up in Connecticut because that's where I lived the longest as a kid. Did 6th grade through high school, and then my parents really didn't move from there until after college. But the name Keener is actually comes from a Methodist bishop, as I understand it, and there could be some legend or lore about this, but in Southwest Arkansas, settled by a lot of Germans and French, it is apparently popular to name your first son after dad, second son after granddad, and if there's a third son, after a favorite member of the clergy. And there was, in fact, a Bishop Keener who is a circuit rider in Southwest Arkansas. So that's how it came in to the family. A lot of the males on my dad's side of the family have it in their name. My grandfather had it. I'm a junior, so my dad had it. My son has it as his middle name. I'm the only one alive that I'm aware of that's called Keener. But so namesake Methodist bishop. Mom grew up in the Methodist church. One of her uncles was a Methodist pastor. My dad grew up in the Methodist church. My grandmother is a recorded artist in the Little Rock choir. So foundationally, as a kid, everything was, anywhere we lived and anything I did church related was in the Methodist church. I had a hardworking dad, a dedicated mom. It was just me and my sister. The truth is, I probably grew up very fortunate. Where we grew up in New Jersey and then certainly in Connecticut was, I didn't really appreciate it as well as I should have when I was growing up, but those are 2 high rent districts, and we didn't want for a lot. I mean, I'm sure I wanted for, this video game or that video game, but I had a very fortunate upbringing with a lot of, in an environment that had a lot, right? And those environments beget other things too, by the way. I didn't want for a lot, and there were a lot of opportunity to get in trouble too, for that matter. I knew from super early age, probably 10 years old, I was going in the military. I just didn't know which. My mom's dad served in World War II in Korea in the Army, retired from the Army. My dad's dad had been in the Army during World War I, but never went overseas. My dad is in the Marine Corps. My dad's brother, so my uncle, is also a Marine, and a cousin was a Marine. And so I knew that I was going to the military. I just didn't know which one. And my parties when I was a kid were G.I. Joe parties. I had G.I. Joes. I was all about that. And all the books I read were either historical novels or actual history about the different wars. And I have an uncle, my mother's brother, went to VMI and then went to Vietnam and was as a Army Ranger, and was killed in Vietnam when I was maybe 3. And so I didn't know him super well. I remember him, but I didn't know him super well. But I grew up in that environment, and there was a lot of hurt and pain and loss, or feeling of sense of loss. But I just remember very distinctly, like all the family members, they would always tell me stories about my Uncle Lee and about how I reminded them of Lee and how I look like Lee, and that imprinted on me significantly, just further the notion I was going in the military. So fast forward to high school, I applied to Navy ROTC, which is how you become a Marine officer unless you go to the academy, Naval Academy, and I applied to West Point. And in fact, I hadn't applied to West Point. A good family friend of ours, 2 different family friends. The first one I had known because his son and I were in Scouts together. He's a little younger than I was, but he had gone to West Point, and he had in fact been in Vietnam. And I was an Eagle Scout. I was on the football team, captain of the track team. I had started and been captain of the ski team. And so he encouraged me to apply to West Point. He said, "You're the perfect kind of guy to go to West Point. You do great there. You should do it. So I did. I applied. It wasn't originally on my list, but I applied. And then I got in. And then the next step of that process was I was at a friend's house, different friend, and told him where I was looking. I was looking at Cornell, Vanderbilt, and West Point. And Vanderbilt was 3 because West Point and Cornell had a ski team. Vanderbilt and Cornell had NROTC units. And I tell this buddy's dad, what I'm looking at. And he said to me, man, let me tell you, if you go to West Point and then go get a Harvard MBA, you will be set for life. That's probably the second big imprint in that story, because I was like, well, then I got to do that. So I went to West Point, and I just figured I'd be an Army Ranger just like my uncle. That'd be cool. I get to West Point my second semester of my freshman year. Freshman years is a nightmare, but I actually did fine in that environment. I thrived with the challenge, and you got to play the game and get through it. And so I did fine. I wouldn't want to do it again, but I did fine. And I made some really great friends in that environment. It turned out there were 7 of us that I would call best friends, and I'll come back to that. But in that process of being at West Point, got my, just getting through freshman year, then my second semester freshman year. I'm sorry, it was first semester sophomore year. I had as one of my professors a Marine officer exchange officer. So he's a Marine. They usually teach at Annapolis if they teach. And of course, Army officers teach at West Point, and every year they do an exchange. They send one there, and as any good college student would do, I try to ingratiate myself with the professor. So, hey, sir, my dad's a Marine. Think it's cool you're a Marine. Long story short, he asked me why I wasn't going to be a Marine. So, well, I'm at West Point. He goes, well, what's that stopping you for? And I said, I'm going to be in the Army. He goes, you should be a Marine. So, there's a pattern coming here. I'm a little impressionable, right, with others. So he encouraged me to apply. There's a way to apply to be commissioned in a service other than the primary sponsor service. So at West Point, you could apply to be commissioned in the Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps. So I applied, and I got declined. And I told this professor, hey, I applied, but I got declined. He goes, well, okay. And that's it? You're going to give up? So, well, sir, I applied. He goes, well, you probably shouldn't be a Marine officer then, if that's how you're going to. I said, oh, I see. So you can only apply once a semester, so I applied the next semester. And I got declined then. And that's when I started getting unhappy about things. At that point, I felt like I had been wronged, because if there was anybody that should be a Marine officer coming out of West Point, it should have been me. My dad's a colonel. My uncle's a colonel. I'm destined, I got this, we're a Gold Star family. There's no reason whatsoever that I shouldn't be a Marine officer. And so, somewhere I applied a third time and got rejected again. And that's when I decided that I had been really wronged. Of course, you're like 19, 20 years old versus City Hall kind of thing. I had to learn a hard lesson. You're not going to win that one. But I also, back to those friends I mentioned, there was a group of 7 of us that were best friends. And so as I kind of got mad at the academy, I decided, well, I'm going to make the academy suit me. And I started an underground fraternity. And we called it Delta Sigma. It's cool. That's a kind of fraternity sounding name. Except we used Delta Sigma because Delta Sigma stood for the dark side. Now, in our minds, we weren't trying to worship the dark side, but we were the dark side. We thought we would represent the dark side of the academy. We were the underground, unofficial, unauthorized fraternity. And, looking back, so we had fun. We did stupid stuff and had fun. There are 7 of us that were best friends. At the academy, when you get in trouble, you get demerits. If you get enough demerits, you have to walk what they call penalty tours, which means you put your full dress uniform on, get your rifle, you go to one of the quads, and you have to march back and forth for an hour at a time. You get a 10-minute break. You got to do 6 hours. You do 6 hours over the course of a Sunday or Saturday. That's a full day. 6 hours over the course of a Saturday is a full day. The average cadet probably graduates a 4-year West Point experience with like 6 hours on the area, they call it. So that would be one Saturday. In that group of 7 of us, we were all known as what are called sentrymen, which you can do the math. That means we each had at least 100 hours on the area. You got to do some things like break some rules to get that. Now, what were the kind is we didn't rob or steal anything, but we'd go off base when you're not supposed to. We'd drink on base when you're not supposed to, and obviously we would get caught, or else they wouldn't know. And so when I look back, I thought I was making the academy suit me, and maybe I was, but I certainly wasn't playing by the rules, and so things started happening. With all that conduct issue, they tried to. I was invited to a conduct review board where if that goes poorly, they can kick you out. And then, so I went before one, and I was successful in defending myself. Without boring you with the details, but I was successful in defending myself, and that was withdrawn. And then not much longer, I ended up getting called before the honor court at West Point. It's a big deal. I think it's a big deal anywhere, but it's a really big deal at West Point. And I'd been accused of cheating on a course project. And again, without kind of unpacking all the details, it didn't go well for me. That was one I couldn't fight successfully. And I ended up going before the superintendent of the academy, who's a 3-star general, and who told me that as a result of the honor board that I was going to be kicked out of the academy. So if you back up, you remember that friend who said you go to West Point and then get your Harvard MBA, you're set for life. All of a sudden, I wasn't going to be set for life. At 20 years old, you think you just, flushed your life down the drain. That didn't go well either. So I didn't take too kindly to that either. And I didn't tell my parents right away either. I think I went home for Christmas. This happened in around Thanksgiving, and then there's this delay and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't tell them until I went home for Christmas. And then I didn't see the general until like the week you come back from Christmas break. So there's some time where they, before they out-process you basically, and they move you out of your environment. So you live with your company mates, and they move you to another part of the barracks where you're in another company. And in that time, so the military has known about veteran suicides and service member suicides for a long time. I know we talk about it a lot today, but they've known about it for a long time. And it's a problem. They do what they can, I think. And at West Point, nobody could be in a single room by themselves. And because of that, not only do you have the school pressures, but you have the military stuff as well. And so you're never supposed to be in a single room. I happened to be in a single room. And it was bizarre. I wasn't supposed to be, but I was. And one night, I was laying in bed, and right out of the closet that was in that room came a dark, shadowy figure. As I've told this story before, the best way I can describe it, it looks like one of the ring wraiths from Lord of the Rings. And he was scary. It was one of those dreams too you have as a kid where you can't speak, you want to scream, but you can't. So it was pretty freaky. And this thing reached out his hand to me and said, "Join me." And I didn't have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ at the time. Growing up in the Methodist Church, I had a church environment, but I don't recall in my background ever being introduced to a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And I had one talk from a youth pastor who told me, and I still remember this, he told me that Jesus wants to have a personal relationship with you. And I said to him in response to that, I said, yeah, but Jesus can't throw the football with me. And his only response was, well, yeah, you're right. Boy, I wish he had unpacked that for me, but he never did. And so I walked away with, well, I don't know what that means. And I also don't ever recall in my church upbringing them talking about spiritual warfare or the devil. He was kind of a cartoon character. They just talked about good stuff. And so I never had the opportunity to develop an understanding of spiritual warfare or what a real personal relationship with Jesus Christ meant. So when this thing comes out of the closet at me, I didn't know what to do. And all I did was know to tell him, no, get away from me. So in that moment, I did. And I told him to leave me. I said, no, leave me, get away. And he turned around and went in the closet. And as I recall, there's a bit of time in between now and then, but as I recall, I said, in Jesus' name, be gone. And I don't know where that came from, because that would not have been something I'd learned anywhere. So I also like to tell people, I think that's an evidence of all of this, but particularly that is evidence that I've had favor in my life for a long time. I didn't recognize it, didn't know what to do with it. But, I was imbued with that, the knowledge that I needed to say no and to invoke Jesus and send that thing away. So he went back into the closet. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. And when I got out of bed in the morning, I very cautiously looked in the closet. There wasn't anything there, not a thing other than the clothes hanging on the rack. I would tell you, I wish I could tell you that was like a benchmark moment in my life, that I stepped off in a different direction or a different path. That wouldn't be true. Obviously, I remember it. Obviously, it was meaningful. But the moment I was hurt by what had happened at West Point, I was at a loss because I just tubed my whole life, right? I wasn't going to be set anymore. And I had to figure out what came next. In the interim period, what happened next actually was that we sued the federal government. And in the course of suing the federal government over my honor court, it came out that there were 2 active duty Army officers who had colluded with each other. I didn't know, but they colluded amongst themselves to get me thrown out because they didn't think I should be an Army officer. Now, whether they were right or not is immaterial. I mean, I'd given them plenty of material to come up with that. I was a sentry man. I had my own rules. I was running this underground fraternity. It's not exactly the model Army officer. But the fact is that they did it on their own. And so when that came out in the case, the federal judge got pretty tough on West Point, and they basically told him in a summary judgment that either you reinstate Cadet Gill or I tell you how to run your honor court from here till eternity. And West Point didn't like that idea. So I was reinstated. Went back to class, went back to my friends, went back to everything, and I just got back on that track. I kind of gave up my notion of being a Marine. I said, I'm going to try to be a decent guy and be a good Army officer, and I'll just get through West Point and go out and do my Army thing. So I've been reinstated at the academy. I'm back in classes. Now it's the summer before my senior year, and I'm off doing different training. I went to Fort Benning, and then I served actually as an interim platoon commander. Then I went up to the Pentagon. I worked for the Army Department of Public Affairs for the general that was the Army spokesman. Great experiences, and things seemed to be going in a decent direction. I get a call from my dad that I needed to call our attorney, who happened to be a family friend, and maybe noteworthy as well. My uncle, who was a Marine attorney, and this family friend who had such a cool guy. He was drafted in the Army, instead went through ROTC, got commissioned, became a artillery forward observer. So he was assigned to infantry units. That dude carried an LSAT prep book in his rucksack the entire time he was in Vietnam studying for his LSAT. His plan was to survive Vietnam, go home, take his LSAT. And he did it. I mean, I've carried rucksacks before, and I reuse socks and reuse, I don't carry undershirts. I mean, you don't want to carry a lot of stuff in your rucksack. This dude was carrying an LSAT, but they're like that thick. It's crazy. Anyway, He was one of my attorneys. And so the Department of the Army had approached him with a deal offer that they would let me leave West Point, kind of wanted me to, but I didn't have to pay anything back. So the deal is, if you start your junior year of classes at any of the academies and do not finish, you have to pay the U.S. government back for your college. And it's a full scholarship from day one. So that's a lot of money. But they said, we'll sign a piece of paper releasing Cadet Gill as long as he agrees not to seek a commission anywhere else in the Army. And we'll all part our ways. So the reality is that I didn't really want to be there. They didn't want me, and we found a way to make that happen. It's very rare. I ended up leaving sometime early August. It was that would be 8 months before I would have graduated and been commissioned. So again, I might have gotten my way, but my path, the path I had designed for myself was interrupted for certain at that point. I guess I left out while I was at the academy. I did do some things that I really enjoyed, one of which was skiing. I grew up skiing and I was on the Army ski team. That matters in the story in a little bit, I guess. But so I had to figure out what I was going to do. And so I called the Navy, said, you were going to give me a scholarship 3 years ago. I didn't take it. Is there anything left? And I called Vanderbilt, said, can I transfer? Long story short, the Navy said yes, and Vanderbilt said yes, so I went to Nashville. When I got to Nashville, technically I was a senior, right, by time and credits and all that, but most colleges won't let you get a piece of their parchment unless you spend at least 2 years. So I had to spend 2 years at Vanderbilt. And what I should have done is double majored or finished up my undergraduate and started my graduate work. Instead, what I tried to do that first semester was try to catch up for the 3 years that I hadn't been in a real college. And so reverting back to, worrying about me and all the things I missed out on, I had a lot of worldly fun, but I wasn't advancing the kingdom, and I certainly wasn't really advancing me. But I'll tell you, through that, so the first year I didn't add a lot to the world, but I had a lot of fun. I did join a fraternity, and I joined the rugby team, and I was in Navy ROTC doing Marine option work. So those things were a foundation. What's kind of cool about, I like to tell a story about my being in the fraternity, not necessarily because I'm a frat boy or because being a frat boy has made a difference in my life, but I joined a fraternity called Sigma Chi, and their motto is in hoc signo vinces, which when translated means in this sign you will conquer. And they did mean the sign of the cross. The founders of that fraternity were Civil War veterans, and they were devout believers. You don't typically find that. I would not suggest that my chapter of Sigma Chi were devout believers throughout college. But again, my story has a lot to do about my having favor and the devourer constantly nipping at our heels. And because God had a plan for me, and he still has a plan for me, that he made sure I got in these places that we're going to do the right thing. And I just think it's so cool that I happen to be in a fraternity where the motto is in this sign you will conquer, and he was talking about the sign of the cross. And some of the best friends I have today are guys that I met in that environment, and we still get together regularly. And I just feel like I had a covering of the blood of Jesus during that time, even when I was doing stupid stuff I shouldn't be doing, but a lot of college kids do anyway. I just feel like I had that. That doesn't mean that everybody in that fraternity did, but I think my story connects to that. So I've left West Point. I'm now at Vanderbilt. And as I look back on that first part of my life, it's really apparent to me that I had a lot of favor in my life. Probably not a lot of favor that I recognized, and certainly not favor that I paid attention to. I used to I guess when I first started telling my story, I gave my story a title called Spiking the Football. And I've gotten rid of that because when you spike the football, it's at the end of a very successful play. And I don't think my story's over. And I now call it Papa Oscar Romeo, which is press on regardless. And so I really think my story is one about someone who's had favor his entire life, didn't always recognize it, was covered. But the other part of the story is about the devourer's relentless pursuit against people who are part of the kingdom and constantly nipping at my heels. But because I had favor, he never could latch on or get a foothold. Even when I opened doors for him, like starting a fraternity called the Dark Side, even when I opened doors for him, because I had favor, the devourer, the devil, didn't get a foothold in my life. And so I might, at this point in my life, having left West Point, started at Vanderbilt, start to realize some of that, but I didn't really internalize that. So I'm at Vanderbilt, finally, get what I thought I'd missed it out in life out of my system and get focused on studies, get focused on the Marine Corps. And the summer after my first year there, this is before email and all that cool stuff. I actually had to come back to campus to get orders to go to Marine Corps Officer Candidate School. So I fly back, and of course it's cheaper to go overnight instead of one day turnaround. So I fly back, called some fraternity brothers if I could crash at their house. They said, of course, they were all going to summer school, but this was a Friday. I flew in on a Friday, and then I was going to fly out on a Saturday. And they were all going to the lake for the weekend, so they wanted me to go with them. And I said, well, I'd love to, but I got to fly out tomorrow. Can somebody get me back? And they couldn't. So they went off to the lake, but I was crashing at their place. I borrowed one of their bicycles, and I rode onto campus. They lived a few blocks off campus. And I ran into a friend of mine, happened to be a girl, and I knew she was at summer school. I said, hey, what's going on? What's happened? I'm in for one night. I'd picked up my orders. So I'd done what I needed to. Now it was free time. And she's like, well, my boyfriend's coming in for the weekend. I did not want to be a third wheel. So I was like, that's cool. You have fun. And got back on my bike and pedaled around. I finally found another friend. And I asked her what was going on. She said, well, she has a friend. She told me she had a friend who was having a pizza and Pictionary party in her dorm room. And this girl was also at summer school. That was my wife. So that night, because I didn't have anything else to do, and this other girl was hanging out with her boyfriend, I went up to Heather's room and we did a pizza and Pictionary party. And that's how I met Heather. So I asked her if when I got back to college, if I could ask her out on a date. She said yes. And I went off. We both went off and finished our summers. And I went to OCS and did that, came back to campus and called her up. And she went out on a date with me. And we had a great time. And then we didn't have a great time because I forgot to tell her we weren't dating anymore. And she ran into me at a club with somebody else on a date. And so we quit talking. And then we happened to have a class together. And I stopped seeing her in class. I don't know why. I asked a friend of hers, you know what happened to Heather? No, she left school. Anybody know why? No, nobody knew why. So I progressed through college, finished up that year. Anyway, this is my 5th year in college. Finish up that year, graduate, got commissioned same day I graduated, go off to the Marine Corps. It's called TBS, the basic school, your initial training as a Marine officer. Then I went through infantry officers course, and I'm headed out to be stationed in California, be a Marine infantry officer, run around the world, play G.I. Joe. I got a letter. My dad came out to visit me, and I invited him out one of my last weekends in Quantico, Virginia. he was going to come out and stay in the bachelor's office. Of course, we were going to play golf. And when he showed up, he brought a bunch of mail. And again, I don't remember having a cell phone. I know we didn't have email. So that's how we communicated. And while he's unpacking his stuff in the BOQ, I'm looking through my mail. One of them happened to be a letter from Heather. I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. Well, that letter was letting me know that I was a dad, which would explain why she left school. And so my dad said, hey, who's that letter from? And I said, well, it's an old girlfriend. Oh, what's she up to? Oh, not much. She's just reaching out to see how I'm doing. We played golf that day. It's the worst golf game I've ever had because I had a lot of other stuff on my mind. So she was reaching out to let me know that I was a dad, and because she thought I would want to know. And she had been through a lot of stuff, and that's really part of her story, going home and having a baby on her own without my being a part of it, which it's part of my story too. But and that was our son, Josh. She had to go through a lot to raise him and to keep him. This is so there's a part of the story here that's really not part of my faith walk, but it is about our family and Josh, and he's here. A young single woman without clarity of what she's going to do in the world, having a baby on her own is terrifying thought. And so she elected to give Josh up for adoption. And almost immediately thereafter regretted the decision. But the way the adoption had gone down, it was kind of an inside job. Someone in the hospital knew somebody and they wanted to adopt a baby, and so just signed this document, and it was under duress. It wasn't done through the right channels. It was done with all the right intents, but not through the right channels. And Heather immediately realized that that's not what she wanted to do. And so the real reason she reached out to me was because I was the father, and the adoption had happened without my parental consent. Of course, I didn't know I was a parent, but it was done without my parental consent. So she reached out to me to let me know I was a dad, and to ask if I would effectively exercise my parental consent so she could get him back. In that moment, and I'm not super proud of it, but in that moment, my first thought was, well, why'd she even have the baby? I'm so glad she never, I'd favor my life, which I think extends to my kids, because God made sure that she didn't call me and ask me before. Because where I was in life, I probably would have said, well, why do you even have the baby? I mean, we're not getting married. You're going to raise him. Why do you want to do that? And then if she had called me about the adoption, I probably would have said, you should do that because he'll have a better life and a stable family than with us. And those were my initial thoughts. My follow-on thoughts were, well, let's establish paternity. Remember the movie Officer and Gentleman, right? Everybody, all the women run around, they want to get themselves an officer. So I had that on the brain because I thought a lot about me more than others. So I did about all I could to avoid kind of the whole process. But I submitted to the paternity test, and first of all, we didn't need to take a paternity test. You put a picture of 3-month-old Joshua next to me, and he looked like my little twin. There was no brainer. There's no question. Not that there should be any question anyway. But we hadn't agreed that we were going to be a couple. I did help her do what she needed to get him back, which was important. So I got to drive from across the country from Virginia to California for my first duty assignment. And I was driving out there, and I was going to drive across the country, and then I was going to go south and go visit Josh and Heather. The short version of the story is I chickened out. I never made that left turn. Just kept on going. A little funny part about that is that when I got out to the West Coast, I was supposed to be checking in at a place called 29 Palms, which is out near Palm Springs. It's about 2 hours east of the coast. Well, I went all the way to the coast to Camp Pendleton, which is the main Marine Corps base on the West Coast, and I checked in there. I was like 100 miles away from where I was supposed to be. So, which is not the right, you don't want to do that. That's like not a smart move as a lieutenant to go to the wrong place and check in. So they made me do some hard work that I didn't want to do for a couple months, and then they finally sent me out to 29 Palms. But it took me a while to get the courage up, but I was going to deploy. I was scheduled to deploy overseas, and so I knew I needed to get out there and see Josh and Rachel. So I make the trip. I make the plans. I get on a plane. I fly out, and I land in Houston. And at Houston Hobby, it's still this way. You come off the plane, you go down towards security, and then you get on an elevator to go down to baggage. And I get on the top of that elevator. It's like out of a movie, man. You're going down the elevator, and all of a sudden you can see people at the bottom. It'd be a great movie scene. Heather is at the bottom of the escalator with Josh in a baby carriage. And I looked at the two of them and just felt instantly in love. I was like, holy smoke, she's hot. And we hadn't seen or hardly talked to each other, right, for a year at least. And we got our baggage. We went back to her parents' house outside of Houston, and I spent the weekend with them. And it was that weekend. And I just said to her, I think we can make this work if you want to, which is not the most romantic thing to say ever, but I did. So fast forwarding, we got married, and I was going to deploy. We were going through this wedding planning stuff, right? I'm in the workup for a deployment, and you might as well be deployed. So if you're going to deploy for 6 months, you've got 6 months of pre-deployment workup. You're in the field all the time, getting ready, training, maximizing your stuff. I'm literally in the Northern California mountains at Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center doing winter mountain leader training. And we lived in these things called Quonset huts down at the base. One Quonset hut had your heads where you go to the bathroom and your laundry, and then you lived in another Quonset hut. If you needed to use a phone, it was bolted to a telephone pole out in the middle of where all the Quonset huts were, exposed to all the air. It's like 12 degrees. And the only way to talk is get on the payphone. We don't have cell phones. So I got a piece of letter when I came out of the mountains one day, a piece of mail when I came out of the mountains one day from my wife. And she had ripped out catalog pages of China and silver and circled options and wanted me to pick which one. I get on the phone. I'm freezing. I'm shaking. She's like, well, which one do you like? I'm like, you got to pick. You got to pick, mate. She said, you can't do that to me. So I was like, I like B and I like C. She said, sure. I said, yes. I didn't know what I was doing. And then I said, maybe we should just delay this whole wedding thing until I get back from the deployment. And if you think about her mindset, what I had taken her through, she goes, there's not a chance you're deploying overseas without a ring on your finger. So I literally came off of an exercise. We get married in May, and I was on board we get married on May 7th. On May 4th, I was on board a amphibious ship out in the middle of the Pacific. Like 3 days before I don't know if I'm going to show up. So I don't know if this should make it in the film or not, but I'm going to tell you a funny story that I tell. In Texas, because they have so many military people, you can get married by proxy. So my best man was my dad. And so when you get married by proxy, your best man will stand in for you. So, and when you're going around, tell a funny fact about yourself. My dad's from Arkansas, and he almost married my wife because I didn't know if I was going to make it back from the exercise in time to show up for my own wedding. Heather doesn't think that's as funny as I do, but I think it's pretty funny. So we get married. We're on active duty, and we're trying to make this life. We've got a son already. We're getting to know each other. I'm getting to know Josh. He's getting to know me. And she's getting to know my family. I'm getting to know her family. We're living life as best we can. Never in my life did I think, growing up in the Methodist church, that a Baptist church would be a happy medium for anything. My wife, while she grew up initially Catholic, her family had gone to the charismatic movement, and I didn't know anything about that. That was just those people on that end. They were all wacky. Turns out Baptist church is a very happy medium for us. And so that's where we started the family, in the Baptist church. And, most Baptist church are really good about knowing and teaching from the Bible. And so I started to get a lot more Bible teaching and understanding, connecting with men in men's groups, etc. And my faith is growing. It was at that time that Heather started to really ask me, what is it that you believe about fill in the blank? Or why do you believe that? What do you believe about that? And I couldn't answer her questions. I either didn't know or I wasn't sure what I believed. And so after, like a long period of that, I didn't know where to go with it. I didn't want to call my parents because I was embarrassed to ask them, what is it that I believe? You raised me in the church my whole life. So I called my sister and I asked her, what is it that we believe? She couldn't answer the question either. So after a long conversation, she and I settled on the Apostles' Creed. We say the Apostles' Creed in the Methodist Church every Sunday. It's in the front of every Methodist hymnal. It's like the most constant thing in the Methodist Church. That's what we believe. We believe the Apostles' Creed. So I vowed right then and there that the Apostles' Creed was fundamental for my belief set, and that's what I was going to believe. I also vowed, when I hung up the phone, that I would never, ever, ever again in my life have to call somebody and ask them what it is that I believe. And so that really launched kind of the next phase of my faith journey, is when I had to get those answers for myself. I wasn't asking anybody else. If I had a question, I was going to find out. If Heather asked me, why do you believe that? I had to be able to answer that. I might not be able to answer it in the moment, but I was going to go figure it out and come back to her. So I owe kind of everything really to Heather for challenging me and giving me the space to go figure it out. Unfortunately for her, the space has been 20 or 30 years, but so we progressed. We're still in the Baptist church at that time. We're in Houston. We moved to Miami, and in Miami, we actually found a Methodist church, and my wife and I, to this day, believe that the Methodist pastor was a spirit-filled guy, just by the way he engaged us and talked to us. So my faith's growing. I'm getting a better understanding of everything, trying to be I will tell you, at that point in our lives, Heather had a much, much better grasp of Scripture than I did. And so as a father in a family, knowing my role, I wouldn't call it friction. There were some challenges for me because I was challenged to be the faith leader of my family. And I would probably argue that my kids might suggest that maybe I wasn't in all aspects that I should be, because their mom, my wife, had a better grasp of Scripture than I did by far. Probably still does. But so I was challenged myself to grow into the role as the leader of my family as a father. So we go to Miami, meet this pastor. He had a heart for men. And I connected on that. We were only there for a couple years. We moved to Atlanta in 2006. And this is where we call home, because where Heather and I have lived the longest our entire lives. And we spend years trying to find the right church. I could write a book about the churches in Atlanta because Heather and I have visited almost all of them. But I also, one of the aspects of my faith journey at this time, I mentioned that Heather, gave me the bandwidth and the motivation to start getting deep on Scripture. That I was still growing into my role as the spiritual leader in my family, as a man and a father. I was also carrying an anchor. And having been in the Baptist church so long, I knew that it's important to be baptized, just profess, it's a outward profession of your faith. But I'd been baptized as a child in the Methodist church. My parents didn't understand the need for adult baptism at all. They questioned it. And so it was something I wanted to do, but I was quite frankly fearful. I just figured I'd wait till my parents died and then I'd do it. But we belonged to a small church, a small Baptist church in Sandy Springs. And the pastor there was a great guy. Spent a lot of time to him, and I talked to him about my challenges, and he was very patient with me about it's has nothing to do with what you go up. It doesn't downgrade the baptism you had as a child. It doesn't do away with any of that. In fact, you can get baptized every month if you want to, right? Kind of thing. But it's important as an adult believer to provide an outward display of your faith. And so I decided then to do that. So that was about 2008, I think it was, at the Mount Vernon Baptist Church. I got baptized as an adult. And so that's like the next chapter of my faith journey. We live in a world of humans. And I think a lot about Job's 3 best friends who show up and basically badger him about what is it that you did to deserve all this. You're going to encounter that. You're just going to encounter that. It was in the Bible 2,500 years ago. Actually, that's Old Testament, so probably 5,000 years ago. It exists today. But you have to understand that they just aren't in the right place and they don't see it for the right thing. If you are, and if you're comfortable where you are, and if you know God's promises and you know that He has a plan for you, you have favor, you shouldn't be embarrassed about anything. It's hard. I mean, because there's guilt, there's shame, and these aren't fun. But I give a lot of credit to my, spiritual father and leader today, PC, Pastor Chuck, who says that vulnerability is men's superpower, and vulnerability starts with humility. And so if I hide behind these things because in the earthly realm they're not cool, they're not what everybody does, and they're shameful or guilt-ridden, I don't think that advances the kingdom. It's not easy to share. I mean, it's not. I don't want pity for it either, because those are some of them. You get shame, you get guilt, you get pity, but none of them are from God. And when people bring them to us, I also know that they're human. So I try not to convict them for not seeing it for what it is. But I think in general today, more so than I have in the past, by the way, I punch through that. I mean, I think, probably early on, people ask, how long you been married? I'd be like, we've been married 5 years. They're like, well, Josh is 7. Oh, you can do math. And then move on. Should I tell you how that happened? And they're like, no, that's okay. So in that way, I didn't shy away from it. I let them do the self-realization. But I look, it's not cool and it's not fun to walk around with a badge of shame or guilt. And I'm not advocating for anybody to do that. But I would suggest that those are things that just hold you back. And that's the devourer nipping at your heels to cause doubt in your life so that you can't advance the kingdom. You got to let those things go, and you got to recognize them for what they are, but but don't let them hold you back. Because if they held you back, you wouldn't be where you are today. And so don't let them hold you back. And we've just been blessed. I mean, that's not the way you're supposed to start a family. But look where we are today. And if I let that, or if Heather let that, I mean, it's probably 10 times worse for a woman, the shame and guilt associated with all that. And I know she's not in love with the way that it all went down, that Josh went through an adoption, then we had to get him back. But you know what? We did. And we're a family. And I can't imagine today, even though 32 years ago I thought, well, maybe he was better off being raised by another family. I cannot imagine today not having my kids, especially Josh, in my life. And if I had let the enemy say, yeah, that's the right thing, then maybe we'd meet, because today you can Google each other and kind of find that stuff, but we wouldn't have had the last 32 years. Now, I can promise you there are parts of that last 32 years that Josh wishes we didn't have, because I wasn't always the best dad, but we've got him. And man, my heart breaks when I think about that not happening. And it also encourages me to just try to be a better dad every day, because I have that opportunity. And so anybody else hearing this or thinking about that, man, take the opportunity. Don't hide behind the shame and the guilt. Go, because you don't want to get to a point in your life where you feel guilty and are hurt because you didn't. Because you can't go back. It's not like a Marvel movie. We can't go back, on an alternate timeline and catch up. It's not going to work. The next probably big step in my faith would be 2021, I think. When I received the baptism of the Holy Spirit. So for a period of almost, 12 years or so, I knew about that. My wife had her prayer language. She spoke in tongues. Her mother spoke in tongues. And I'd been to church with them. I was a little freaked out about all that, not going to lie. But I, it was a part of I couldn't deny it. And my wife's a godly woman. My mother-in-law is like the greatest prayer warrior you've ever met. And her daughter inherited that too. And as crazy as I might like to think my mother-in-law was, she'd say stuff and come true, so you can't deny it. But I wasn't ready for it. And so we had a night at Restoration where you were invited to come down and be prayed for. I actually walked up to my brother, Felix. He said, "What can I pray for you for?" I said, "I want to receive my prayer language." And so he prayed that I would be baptized in the Holy Spirit. And that night I received the baptism in the Holy Spirit. And I think it's wonderful. I love it. It took me too long to seek it out, right? I don't know why it took me 12 years. I mean, it's all about getting over myself. And that anchor I carried, even though I'd set aside that anchor to get baptized, my parents are still alive. And the Methodist Church doesn't recognize the gifts of the Spirit today. They're Old Testament kind of stuff. We don't need them anymore. Or at least I don't remember hearing about them in the Methodist Church. I haven't been there in a long time. And so that probably held me back a little bit too. I needed to set myself free of that. And to be my own man, to be the spiritual leader of my own family. Whether I had that as a strong example or not, I needed to do it for me and for my family. So it was great. But I can tell you, when you're charging hard for the kingdom, it really ticks the devil off. And just because you get baptized in the Holy Spirit or going to church every day doesn't mean the devil's going to leave you alone. In fact, it would suggest to me that means he's going to come even at you harder. And if you're not prepared for it, it's going to be painful, because it's painful either way. So I mentioned Job earlier. I can relate to our main man Job all too well, unfortunately. Now, Job had some terrible things happen in his life, and I want no part of those. But he went through a lot of calamities, and we've been through a season. And so our oldest, our son Josh, in February of 2023, lost his job in DC. It's tough. And he had a hard time finding another job. As parents, you worry for your kids. Again, worry is something we're not supposed to carry, but we're all human. And you worry for your kids. And he was going through a lot personally at that time as well, during that time in DC. And we were very prayerful. In fact, I don't know if he knows this, but we were praying for him that he would get a new job and that he would leave DC. So when Josh called me and said, "Hey, I got some bad news." "Oh man, what happened?" He said, "I lost my job." I was, genuinely sorry for him. But Heather could hear on the phone, and we were actually high-fiving. Because we felt like it was an answer to prayer. That it was going to give him an opportunity to find a new job, because his skills weren't being maximized and he wasn't happy there. And we wanted him to be on his path in the right way. So, but then he couldn't find a job. That was hard. And you worry about your kids. So that's February, March of 23. In June of 23, Heather and myself and our youngest, Margaret, are out of the country on 2 different trips, and our house flooded. We don't live on a river or a lake, but the washing machine decided it hated us, and the line ruptured and flooded the entire house, and made it a little worse because the laundry room was on the top floor. Water goes downhill. So we came back from out of the country to that. That's a devastating experience. Everything in the house was affected in one way or another. So we start the process to recover all your personal property, rebuild the house. We spend the next, so that's June of 23. And we're going through that. It's hard. We had to move into temporary housing. We're living in an apartment. It's our youngest child, Margaret's senior year in high school. She doesn't get to live at home. We're living in an apartment. You go from a 8,000 square foot house to 1,500 square feet. People get really close, and there's not a lot of room to separate if you need it. So we're going through a season for sure. In there, by the way, Josh gets another job. He moves to Pittsburgh. It's not quite all the way to Atlanta. In fact, it's the opposite direction. It's more north, but he got another job, and we were happy for him in that. And then in that summer we go on a family trip with my parents and all our kids and my sister and her husband. Down to the beach, and seemed like we have a nice time. A couple months later, our daughter reveals to us that she's chosen an alternative lifestyle, and in the course of all that, tells us that if we can't support her in that, then we don't love her. And effectively cuts us off. And it caused a lot of challenges in the family, because it turns out my sister was aware of what was going on and chose not to engage me on it. So now we also have a prodigal child. Shortly after that, Josh lost the new job that he got in Pittsburgh. And that being said, it was an opportunity for us to tell Josh that we'd love for him to come back to Atlanta. We got a room in this apartment. You can have it. And we'd love you. We need you at home. We'd love to have you at home. So as the dust is settling around that, at least we got him closer. And it created an opportunity for him to get his feet underneath him as well. So my daughter comes. We were supposed to be back in the house in January. That didn't happen. Then March. And my youngest daughter comes to me and says, Dad, all I want for Christmas, right, December, is to be back in our house for my graduation, which is in May. So Dad goes into action. Dad's pressing contractors. We're getting close to graduation. Dude, you got to have us in the house. I got my parents, my in-laws, a niece with a baby coming. Everybody's going to be here. Graduation, got to have Margaret back in the house. I have all of our personal property shipped back into the house. And about 2 weeks before graduation, the week before graduation, contractors say, you're going to move back in. You can do it. Well, I looked around. I said, look, man, the stove's not here. We have a sink. Yes, there's a bathroom. The beds are set up, but it's still a construction zone. I got some older people coming in, and my niece got a 7-month-old baby. I wasn't comfortable. So you guys got to work hard across the weekend to get this done. Come Monday, just wasn't done yet. I gave them a list of things. Tuesday, I just wasn't comfortable. And so Tuesday night, I had to break the news to our youngest that she's not going to be back in the house. Tuesday night before graduation, I had to break the news to our youngest that we weren't going to be back in the house for graduation. We just couldn't get it there. And so that night, we order hotel rooms for everybody. That's Tuesday night. First people are coming in on Wednesday night. That's why we had to get the hotel room. On Thursday morning, I'm getting ready. Well, on Thursday morning, I'm planning to get up early to go to model men at church, men meeting at 6 a.m. on every other Thursday. And the alarm, or what I thought was the alarm, goes off. And I sit up kind of dazed and confused because it's a little earlier than I thought it was. It wasn't the alarm. It was our neighbor calling us, asking us if we were in the house. I said, no, why? He goes, well, it's on fire. I said, what? Well, there's flames coming out of your roof. This is 3:30 in the morning. It's a little surreal. 2 days before graduation, I was supposed to be in the house. Heather and I jump in the car. We drive down to the house, and sure enough, there's our newly rebuilt house that we were days from moving back in burning. And there's nothing we can do. Pray that it'll get knocked out quickly. Pray that it won't touch much stuff, but it got everything. What the flood didn't get, the fire got. The house was totaled, declared a total loss, and we're in the midst of rebuilding from that. It's not fun. It's painful. But I will tell you, I grew up believing in the stories of the Bible. I grew up believing in miracles. I mean, they're in the Bible, right? They talk about them all the time. But I'd never really been convinced that I had been the recipient of a bona fide spiritual miracle until I sat in my front lawn looking at that fire. Turns out the epicenter of that fire was 15 feet from the bed where Heather and I would have been sleeping. Had I been successful in pressing the contractors to get us back in that house, I wouldn't be sitting in front of you today. Josh probably wouldn't have made it out. My daughter was in the room next to us. She wouldn't have made it out. My in-laws might have made it out, but in their elderly state, they'd probably still be in the hospital. I believe it's a bona fide spiritual miracle that we were not in that house. God protected us from being in there. And that's why I'm here today. And so I don't know everything, and I'm still on a journey, but here's what I do know about being around. They say that God won't give you more than you can handle. I truly appreciate that. He must think I can handle a lot because it feels like a lot. But I also know this, that if I'm here breathing, it's because he still has plans for me. And I got to make the most of that. And I don't always make the most of that, but I got to keep that in mind, and I got to do my best to do it, because otherwise he would have called me back. And since he hasn't called me back, he's got a plan for me. And because he has a plan for me, I know he has a plan for my wife. He has a plan for my son. He has a plan for my daughter who's a prodigal. He has a plan for our youngest daughter who's in college now. I believe in his promises. God says that children will return to and return to their fathers. Our daughter Rachel knows the word. She knows truth. And we're praying fervently that the Holy Spirit will pierce her heart and her mind and her eyes with the knowledge of the truth and return her to us without shame or guilt. We just want her to come home. And Josh will find his path. He's been given tremendous opportunity, and he's going to make the most of it. I know he will. He's found a community. He's smart. He's so capable. God's got a plan for him. God's got a plan for Margaret, our youngest. And God's got a plan for Heather and I. We're new to the empty nester stage of life, and so we get to go figure out what that is all about. And I just pray that because God's given us this opportunity that we make the most of it. In this interim period, after I get baptized, before I receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit, I was working at a company that's headquartered in San Antonio, and I was an executive there. And the executive, the senior executive, the CEO, they were running a campaign in our insurance part of the business, and it was called the 6-word story. Whoever could come up with the greatest 6-word story would win a free life insurance product. And he actually challenged all of the executives to come up with their own 6-word story. So the 6-word story emanates from Hemingway. Apparently, he would get together. By the way, not the most, not a father of the faith, but nonetheless, God can use anybody. Hemingway would get together with his writer cronies down in Key West every summer, and they'd challenge each other to feats of literary genius and stuff like that, right? Most guys get together and try to go fishing or wrestling. They would have feats of literary strength. So there's this thing called the 6-word story, and they challenge each other to come up with the shortest, most complete, compelling story. So my son was an English major at Baylor, and so when I heard about this, I called him to find out if it was legit. He says it's in Wikipedia, so it must be real. So I had to come up with my own 6-word story. And I did. I've come up with, I'm an overachiever. I've come up with 2. And my first 6-word story is In Hoc, Family Eagle, Semper Fi. In Hoc, Family Eagle, Semper Fi. And in hoc is short for in hoc signo in case, which is in the sign you will conquer. And I put that at the very front of my 6-word story because it represents my dedication to the cross. And it's in the first position because it's also what drives and leads our family. Now, it's also kind of cool that came from my experience at a fraternity, and I have some of the guys I met in that world. It's not cool because I was a fraternity boy, but it's because some of the greatest relationships I made came from that. So it's a foundational place in my 6-word story. Family. If I had said father, son, brother, dad, that's 4 words. Husband, you could take up a whole 6-word story with those important words, but family is important to me, and so it had to be in there. Eagle is important. At a point in our lives, the Boy Scouts played a big role in my family. My dad's an Eagle Scout, my uncle's an Eagle Scout, my cousin's an Eagle Scout, I'm an Eagle Scout, and my son's an Eagle Scout. Not in love with where the Boy Scouts is today, but obviously the things we learned as a family were foundational in that way, and we all experienced that together. So we are a family of eagles. So in hoc, family, eagle, and then Semper Fi. Semper Fi is short for Semper Fidelis, which is the motto of the Marine Corps, and it means always faithful. And it's how I truly try to live my life to my Creator and my Heavenly Father, to my family and to my friends and to my coworkers. And so in hoc, family, eagle, Semper Fi is my 6-word story. I don't know if Hemingway would have picked it, but it works for me, and it says a lot about me. I said I had a second 6-word story. If you've ever seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, which is one of my favorite movies. At the end of the movie, Tom Hanks and his squad have found Private Ryan, but they have to defend this bridge against the Germans. And so they got to hold the bridge. In the battle, Tom Hanks is wounded, and he's mortally wounded, leaning up against a motorcycle, as I recall. And he calls Private Ryan over to him, who is Matt Damon. And he's dying, and he tells Matt Damon to lean over. And in that moment, he said to Matt Damon, "Earn this." And then a few moments later in the movie, they pan out to what happened at the beginning of the movie, which is an older Private Ryan was at the cemetery in Normandy. And it shows an older Private Ryan, and he falls to his knees, and his family runs to him. And he turns to his wife and says, "Tell me I lived a good life." So I had to come up with a 6-word story about that. And my 6-word story could become 7 or 8 now, but it's earn this, Lee, Tom, Garrett, and Jack. Lee was my uncle who was killed in Vietnam when I was 3. Tom was my high school football quarterback. I was his right guard. There's always a good relationship between the quarterback and the lineman. He went in the Marine Corps when I did. Stud of a guy, Marine Recon, was at the reconnaissance school in California, and as all good Marines want, he wanted to go to combat. He fought hard to get there. He got orders, finally go to Iraq. A month into Iraq, he had a problem in his leg. Something was going on, so they had to evacuate him, and he went to Germany. They took an x-ray, and he had a mass the size of a softball in his leg. He died 3 months later. Garrett was one of my best friends in high school. I'd known him since the 6th grade. He developed brain cancer, had a wife and 2 beautiful kids, and he was taken from us when we were in our 30s. And then Jack, when we lived in Houston, Jack was a playmate of our daughters, our older daughters, Rachel. And so when Jack was 3, I think, on a Thursday, he got the flu. On Friday, they took him to the hospital, and he went to the Lord on Sunday. God called all of them back at that time for his purpose. What I know is that they're not here today. And so, like I say, what I know is if I'm still here breathing, then God has a purpose for me. And so I want to earn this every day. I want to earn this every day. When I first came up with the idea of telling my story, the title I gave my story was Spike in the Football. But the more I think about that, you spike the football at the end of a successful play when you get in the end zone, and the drive is over. And that's not my story. My story is far from over. And so I developed a new title, which is Papa Oscar Romeo. And Papa Oscar Romeo stands for Press On Regardless. And I first learned it in the Marine Corps, where you'd be downrange on a mission and things would go wrong. And you'd call higher headquarters and tell them everything that went wrong and say, "What do you want me to do?" And they'd say, "Papa Oscar Romeo, press on regardless, accomplish the mission. Your truck broke, you're lost, you don't have food, you're late, the weather's rolled in, Papa Oscar Romeo, continue the mission." And when I look back at my life, and which I think can be summarized by having favor from a very early age, the devil just coming after me, nipping at my heels all the time, and me hitting roadblocks, whether it's my supposed life plan being derailed at West Point, or starting a family in a significantly non-traditional manner, having my house flood, a prodigal child, having my house burned down then, just when we're trying to get back. It's a story of Papa Oscar Romeo. Press on regardless. I can't let the devil win. I won't let him win. I believe in God's promises. I believe that he has a better future for us. And I'm resolute in that. I've got an amazing partner in my wife who's helped me develop my faith walk so much better than I ever could have. I've found a community of men. I found a spiritual leader that believes in the power and strength of men being greater men and leading their families. If the devil's coming after me, it's because he doesn't like where I'm going and who I am. And I'm okay with that. And I'm not going to let that hold me back. Trials aren't over in my life. Maybe. Lord, I hope not. But even if they are, I know I can get there because I'm going to Papa Oscar Romeo, and I've got God on my side, and I've got his favor. And I'm still breathing. So he's got more for me. And I just want to bring glory to the kingdom in all that I do. And I hope that he keeps the Holy Spirit around me at all times so that I can do that. And I know I'll trip up here or there, but I know how to get back on track. And it's been a pretty interesting ride. My life has. I couldn't have written this book if I tried. Wouldn't have been the one I would have written. But it's not such a bad story. And I hope that at the end of the day, it's a really good story. And then I hope that the things I've gone through, and when I share them, that they can help others in their journey too. There's a purpose to all that I've gone through, and I just pray and hope that in some way it helps others. Brother, I don't know what you're going through, but I know if you're listening to this, then the Holy Spirit's connected us in some way. If there's even 1 ounce of my story that can resonate with you, please take this. Papa Oscar Romeo, press on regardless. It will get better. God means so much more for us in life than whatever you're dealing with right now. If it's shame, if it's guilt, if it's condemnation, those don't come from God. They don't come from a heavenly place. Know that he has great favor for you in your life. I know today that I'm breathing, and the reason I'm breathing is God has more for me in life. If you're breathing, he has a plan for you. He has more for you and your family planned in your life. You gotta face that. You gotta step into the ring, and you've got to be the man that God has designed you to be and wants you to be. And if you don't think you can be it, that thought's not coming from a heavenly space. Because God has designed us to be the men that we're supposed to be. Embrace it. Go after it. It's a lot harder to give up on something than it is to go for something. And I just want to implore you with all my love and heart, whatever you're facing, man, you can overcome it. And if you need somebody to talk to, come find me, because I'll be there for you. And if you can't find me, I promise you, there's a brother somewhere nearby that's just waiting for you to call him, and they want to come around you. And we as men, we got to do that more. We got to show some humility and vulnerability and seek out other men and lock arms with us, because you're destined for great things. Keep breathing, brother. Love you.